Hello, everybody. Today we are going to talk about the details of the structure and functions of the different organic molecules. So on Wednesday, you learned that organic molecules, polymers of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins are found in our food, and they are made of many of these smaller building block molecules called monomers. When you eat your food, what your body does is break them down into their individual building block monomers, and then your body puts them back together in different ways to build your organic molecule polymers. So there are four classes of organic molecules: carbohydrates, lipids, which is a fancy term for fats, proteins, and then nucleic acids, which includes molecules like DNA. We're going to talk about carbs, lipids, and proteins today. We're going to save nucleic acids for another unit. We're going to do a whole separate unit all about DNA later on this year. We have the carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are sugars and starches. Their function is to provide short-term energy storage. So, for example, the energy that you are using right now is a carbohydrate. And often you might hear of people before they run a marathon, they do something called carbo loading, which basically means they eat a whole bunch of pasta and bread the night before they run a marathon, so that way they have energy to last them the next day as they run the race. Carbohydrates, they also function to give structure to plant cells. Plants don't have bones, so they use carbohydrates to help give them support and structure. Take a look at this photo of a carbohydrate molecule. What elements are present in this molecule? The elements found in carbohydrates are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in a 1:2:1 ratio. That's what the word carbohydrate means. Hydrate means water. So we have H2O and then carbo, and a carbon onto it. So this 1:2:1 ratio means you have twice the amount of hydrogens than you do carbon or oxygen. So if you look at the chemical formula for a carbohydrate, this is the chemical formula for glucose. We have 6 carbons and 6 oxygens. So that's a 1:1 ratio of carbon and oxygen. They are equal. And then we have twice the amount of hydrogens. So 12 hydrogens. Same with this carbohydrate molecule. We have equal amounts of carbon and oxygen and double the amount of hydrogens. So that's a 1:2:1 ratio. Monomers, building blocks of carbohydrates, are called monosaccharides, also known as simple sugars. Mono means one, saccharide means sugar. Some examples are glucose, fructose, like in high fructose corn syrup, and galactose. Notice that these words all end in OSE. If you read a word and you are unfamiliar with it and it ends in OSE, that is a big clue that you're talking about a carbohydrate molecule. Next, we have disaccharides. Disaccharides are another type of simple sugar. Like these are made of 2 monosaccharides. Di means 2, so you have 2 monosaccharides, you get a disaccharide. One example is sucrose. Sucrose, that's the stuff that you put in your coffee, in your baked goods, table sugar. Lactose is the type of sugar that's found in milk. So you might have heard of lactose intolerance. That's someone that can't digest lactose sugar. And then maltose and dextrose are other examples of disaccharides. Notice again that all these terms end in OSE, so we are talking about carbohydrates. Carbohydrate polymers are called polysaccharides. If 3 or more monosaccharides are joined together, you get a polysaccharide. Some examples of polysaccharides are starch. These are found in plants, so you get cornstarch, potato starch. Glycogen is animal starch that's stored in the liver. So after you eat sugary cereal or donut for breakfast with all that sugar, what your body does is takes that extra sugar and stores it in your liver so that way you can have energy later on in the day. Cellulose is a polysaccharide. This is the carb that gives plant cells their structure. Cellulose is important for us, even though we cannot digest it because it is a source of fiber. It keeps your digestive system healthy and working smoothly. So here's a question for you. Fructose, sucrose, and starch are all examples of A, carbohydrates, B, lipids, C, nucleic acids, or D, proteins. The answer is A, carbohydrates, because we have fructose and sucrose, those end in OSE, so we're talking about a carbohydrate. Next, we have lipids. Lipids are fats, oils, steroids, and waxes. Now, what lipids all have in common is that they do not mix well with water. They are said to be hydrophobic. Phobic, like a phobia, means fear, and hydro means water, so they have a fear of water. If you ever tried to mix water and oil together, you know that it doesn't work very well. That is because the oil is a hydrophobic lipid. Some of the functions of lipids are long-term energy storage. So, for example, a bear will try to bulk up on fat before it hibernates for the winter because it's going to need energy over the course of the winter months. So, long-term energy storage, where carbohydrates are more short-term energy storage. So, a few hours, lipids store energy for a long time. They also function in waterproofing because they are hydrophobic. They create your cell membranes. They protect your organs. They help keep you warm. So like this walrus here, it's got a layer of fatty blubber to help it keep warm in the Arctic. And then they are also important for the production of hormones. This image shows a lipid molecule. What elements do you see in this molecule? So lipids, they contain a lot of carbon and hydrogen and just a little bit of oxygen. They're not in a ratio like in carbohydrates. And then a special lipid, which we're going to talk about in a minute, is called a phospholipid, and it contains phosphorus. Lipid monomers are known as fatty acids. They can be saturated or unsaturated. Saturated fatty acids are solid at room temperature, and these include things like animal fats, so butter, cheese, lard, bacon. If you put those out on the counter, they're going to stay solid at room temperature. That fat isn't going to melt until you add some heat to it. Unsaturated fatty acids are liquid at room temperature, so things like oils. Plant and fish oils are unsaturated fatty acids. Lipid polymers are known as triglycerides. Tri means three, and so fats and oils are made of three fatty acids plus a molecule called glycerol that keeps them all together. Another really important lipid are phospholipids. These kind of look like a balloon with two strings. These are made of two fatty acids and a phosphate head, and this is the lipid that makes up your cell membranes. And so we'll talk more about this special lipid when we get to membranes. Here's a question for you. Waxes form a waterproof coating over the stems and leaves of many terrestrial plants. The waxes are composed of fatty acids linked to long-chain alcohols. Based on this information, Waxes are which type of organic molecule? A. Lipids, B. Nucleotides, C. Polysaccharides, or D. Proteins? The answer is A. Lipids. In the question, it mentions waterproof, and so lipids are hydrophobic, so they're not going to mix well with water. And then they also mention fatty acids, which is a monomer of lipids. So that's how we know lipids is the answer. Next, we have the proteins. Proteins, they have many functions. They're multi-purpose molecules. And as a result, they have a lot of different functions. They function in structure, for hair, skin, and nails, for movement, like in your muscles, you have a lot of protein. They play a role in your immune system. So, for example, antibodies help protect you against germs. And then enzymes. We're going to talk more about enzymes in class, but these are molecules that speed up chemical reactions in the body. And lastly, transport. You have a protein called hemoglobin in your blood that helps transport oxygen. And then you also have lots of proteins in the membranes of your cells that helps to transport stuff into and out of the cells. Notice that energy is not a function of protein. The two energy molecules that you use are carbohydrates and lipids. Proteins do all these other things, but energy is not one of them. What elements do you see in this protein molecule? So in protein, we have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and sometimes sulfur. So we've seen all of these different molecules with all of the CHNOPS elements. Protein monomers are called amino acids, and you have 20 different kinds. All are the same except for this group here called the R group. And the R group identifies the amino acid. So this just shows some of the different amino acids that are out there and the different R groups that are highlighted in white. So you notice some have sulfur, some have nitrogen, and they all have different shapes. Here's a question for you. When proteins are broken down, phenylalanine is sometimes produced. Phenylalanine contains the elements carbon, nitrogen, hydrogen, and oxygen. Phenylalanine is which type of compound? An amino acid, a fatty acid, a monosaccharide, or a phospholipid? The answer is A. And we're talking about proteins, and monomers of proteins are amino acids, and it's got the elements carbon, nitrogen, hydrogen, and oxygen. Proteins are the only molecule that we have talked about so far that contain nitrogen. Protein polymers are called polypeptides. Amino acids are strung together to form a polypeptide. Polypeptides will then fold depending on the chemistry of the R groups of the amino acids. So for example, some of those R groups are hydrophobic and will fear water and want to sort of hide in the center of the protein molecule, while other R groups really like water and will want to be on the outside of the protein so they can hang out with water molecules. Some proteins are also made of multiple polypeptides. So we have a string of amino acids. That string will start to fold and twist until we have a unique three-dimensional shape. And then sometimes we can even add more polypeptides in order to complete the protein. So protein polymers have unique shapes because of the folding of the 20 different amino acids. And the structure of the protein is going to determine function. That's why proteins can do so many amazing things. It's because you can have so many unique structures of proteins. Now, the structure and function is important because if the shape of a protein is incorrect, then the protein can't do its job. Unfolding a protein is something called denaturing, and it causes proteins to lose their function. We're going to talk more about denaturing when we get into enzymes. This is what denaturing looks like. We have a folded protein, and we can unfold it.